welcome. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This is the second in a series that I'm running right now where I am speaking with inspiring leaders. And if you were on the last one, the last person I had was Morna Simpson, who is somebody that I know here based in Scotland. And we talked about risk-taking and vision and how you go about achieving what you want in your career. Today, I am delighted to be with Kim-Anh. Kim-Anh, hello and welcome. Kim-Anh and I used to work together when I worked for Adobe, and Kim-Anh still works for Adobe. And it's great actually to have you here, Kim-Anh, and to connect with you again after what's been a little bit of time. I know you're in my community as well, but to actually have the opportunity just to kind of reconnect and chat, and as we were preparing for this, just to kind of touch base with you again and see how you're doing. So I've really enjoyed doing that. And thank you very much for giving up your time today to do this and to share your insights with us. Anything you want to say before we dive in, Kim-Anh, before I talk about or before I introduce our topic?
No, I think we should just jump in. I'm really happy to be able to share my insights. I am by no means an expert on any of these things. I've just figured a few things out as I go. So would love to hear from others about their tips and tricks as well as we all try and navigate this complicated topic.
Yes, and speaking of the topics, our topic today is all about, I guess in a nutshell, it's about work-life balance, if we were to kind of wrap it up into one neat little package. And I think the themes around that Kim-Anh and I have talked about are getting clarity, creating boundaries, and being able to say no. And I think, how do you say no? How do you say no in a way that doesn't marginalize you and that doesn't leave you feeling really guilty about letting people down? And I think that if you can master that skill, I think that's a key skill to have in all walks of life, not just in a leadership position, but in all walks of life. So that's our topic for today. We'd love to hear what other people's thoughts as we go through this. And again, if you do have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the chat pod. And I think just to welcome you, Kim-Anh, and give a little bit of background to who you are, I do have a little bit of an introduction here, and if you want to add to this, feel free to do so. But what can I say about you? So Kim-Anh, I think first and foremost, you describe yourself as a proud and busy parent. I know you have 2 young boys, and I've seen plenty of pictures of them on Facebook. So you're a very active and engaged mum, first of all. And you're also in a project management role. So you're a project management professional, and you work currently for Adobe as a senior manager in the strategy and ops function. In addition to that, so on top, you are also the local site leader in Boston, so in the Adobe office in Boston. I guess you're not there right now, you're dialing in from home. It doesn't look like an office that's so local site leader in Boston, you're an active volunteer, and interestingly, you're also the founder of a charity, so the Wishbone Project, which is a cookbook that raises money for cancer charities, and I know that's a charity that's very close to your heart. So a very full and hectic life by the sounds of things. Lots of priorities to juggle in there. Anything you would add to that before we jump in?
No, I will just correct that I'm a site leader for Adobe and Women, which is a corporate initiative around promoting women at Adobe, growing leaders from within, and looking at gender and diversity topics.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay. So let's get started then. And so we're talking about clarity, creating boundaries, and saying no. And certainly, when you think about the introduction I've just given for you, you certainly pack a lot in, you cram a lot into your life. I also know, and not just because of this topic and for preparing for this today, but I know this of you anyway from having worked with you, that balance is an incredibly important piece of what you do. And the balance that you put in place around your life is something that you protect. You vigorously protect that, I would say, if that's an okay word to use. So to get us started on that, maybe if you could just talk a little bit about, what does balance look like to you? What does it mean to you? and how do you juggle everything? Because there's a lot in there. You know, when I look at your introduction, you have a lot going on, shall we say. So how do you make that, how do you make it work?
So balance for me, first and foremost, is just giving myself permission to manage and execute on just the top handful of things on my to-do list for the week. And sometimes I look at my day, I look at my week. I find that looking at my week helps me to just balance things across. So there's only so many things you can do in a day. But balance is also about granting myself the permission to not get everything done, and to just accept that some things just won't happen and I won't be able to do everything that I want to do. So I remember my first week at Adobe, and this is almost 10 years ago. Someone said something really interesting to me that has really stuck with me through the years. He said, Kim-Anh, if I went home when I was done my to-do list, I would never go home.
Wow. Yeah.
There's always more work to do. And, I remind myself of this all the time, because at the end of the day, sometimes I look at my to-do list and I think, I really should I keep working? And I think to myself, you know what, tomorrow's a new day. I'll reprioritize what I have to do tomorrow and I'll work off the top again. But giving myself that permission, I think, really helps for me to just stay sane, knowing that there's a lot I want to do, there's a lot I need to do, but sometimes I don't always get it done, and that's okay.
Yeah, I love what you say about giving yourself permission, and that really resonates with me. And I think the other thing that really resonates is there's a lot that you want to do and there's a lot that you need to do, and it sounds like there's separation in that for you, that they could be the same thing, but they could be separate things as well, or different things, and that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to know, what's a want and what's a need, and that it's not the same thing. So, one of the things we were talking about in preparing for this call was about clarity.
Yes.
And knowing what was important to you. And so I think it's really important when you think about clarity and what clarity is, it's about having the state of mind to be able to see things clearly, to know what's important to you. And I think if you don't know what's important to you, then it's really hard to work towards achieving balance, because how do you know what boundaries to set? How do you know what are these things that you have to fiercely protect in order to achieve work-life balance? So for me, balance is all around setting up fences, around protecting those really precious things to you, and then being able to defend those once they're there. But if you don't know what they are, then you really don't know where to start. You don't know what to prioritize. And so clarity is really important. And if you don't know how to get clarity, that's where you have to start to ask yourself some kind of introspective questions about what do you want more of in your life? What would you do if there were two of you? And what would you look back on and regret and wish that you had done? So for me, it's really important to make that investment up front and to get that clarity, and remember to revisit, because clarity is something that, your life changes, your circumstances changes, your priorities will change. So it's not just about getting clarity once, it's about constantly getting clarity, making sure you are thinking about what's really important to you, so that you know which are the balls that you're going to be actively juggling and which ones you're just going to decide to let drop.
Yeah. Interesting. I heard you say something, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard you say something about, imagine if there were two of you. Is that what you say that?
Yeah.
Can you maybe give us a little bit more color around that? I've never heard that before. So what do you mean by that?
Well, the idea, I think we would all love to clone ourselves and think, okay, well, if there were two of me, then in theory, I could get more done. So, I think a lot of us spend time on things that are tactical or, urgent. And sometimes we don't get to the things that are important. And so when you think about what if there were two of you, the idea is around, well, what else would I do? And just that process helps you to realize, well, if there were two of me, then I would paint, I would play guitar, I would travel more. And that process of saying, okay, well, I have someone to do my laundry, so then I can go and do this instead. I think some of that, just that thinking of, what would you do if you have more time is really about that introspection.
Yeah, so to me that sounds like really honing in on what is it that you want? What is important to you? If you had all the time in the world, or if you didn't have all the time in the world, I mean, you could flip it, I guess. And then, and what would surface then? What would show up then? So
Yeah.
Interesting. And so then it sounds like you've done that, you've gone through that process, you've got that clarity. So then what has surfaced for you then in terms of what is really important that you then prioritize around?
Yeah, I think that the clarity is really important because then you can really start to make that assessment. You know, what choices am I going to make? What am I going to prioritize?
Mm,
And in that process, I've really realized that important and urgent are not the same thing. Like a lot
yes.
of people think it's the same thing, but it's not. You know, urgent means it has a deadline, it maybe has to be dealt with immediately, but a lot of the things that are urgent in our lives can tend to be a bit more tactical. But the things that are important, these are like these really strategic things. They contribute to your longer term goals. And so these are things that have to get done at some point,
Mm,
maybe not today, but those are the things we have to make time for. We have to schedule that. We have to
yeah.
make sure that they happen. But you have to juggle that important and urgent and recognize they're not the same. So if something is urgent, for me, it's really about asking, like, what is the deadline? And even just asking the question, some people come in and you think it's urgent, but actually it's not. You know, it doesn't have to be done right this minute. And things that are important but not urgent, those are the things that you want to make time for. You want to schedule those things to fit them in.
Yeah.
And then if you have things that are not important but urgent, those are the things that you have to think about. Like, does it have to be done by me? Can I delegate that?
Yeah.
And then if you have things that are not important and not urgent, those are things that maybe you just want to give yourself permission to say, it's just not going to get done. You know, and if it doesn't get done, then what can you do to mitigate that? You know, it could be as simple as just saying, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to get to this. Or I'd love to go to this event, but I'm actually not going to be able to go. But you know what, I'm going to send my husband instead, right? So you, even though you know you're going to drop that ball, what can you do about it? And
Yeah.
just not do it, right? Not take it on, not add more things, but just mitigate for it.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Kim-Anh. And then it sounds like you have, so you've got your clarity, you're using that to help you prioritize, and you then obviously create boundaries for yourself around that. So what does that look like for you, and what, you know, how do you create boundaries, and what boundaries do you have?
So for me, one of the important steps in setting those boundaries is really trying to challenge your assumptions first. You know, is it really important to you? And really just to introspect a little bit to understand that these expectations that I have of myself, or maybe that I think that others have of me, that it's important to challenge those and just make sure that those are real things. So for example, you know, I would love to have a house that is clean and in order. But, you know, and so, you know, there was a point where I said to my husband, I said, oh my God, you know, I haven't cleaned the house in a while. The house is a mess. It's really bothering me. And in my mind, there was this expectation that, you know, like the house would be clean. But then he said to me, he's like, I don't care. I don't care if the house is a mess. Like, come sit down on the couch and watch a movie with me. So I
Mm,
think it's really important to sort of say to yourself, like, is this an expectation I've put on myself? Is this an expectation I think somebody has on me? And challenge to see if those are actually real.
mm,
Because I think a lot of times just having that open conversation with your partner, with your spouse, with yourself
yeah,
is really important. Because, you know, even though someone might have an expectation of you, is that important? Does that person's opinion matter? And realistically, do I care if my house is a mess? No, because tomorrow my kids will just make it another mess. So
yeah,
there are things that you kind of just have to accept at the end of the day. But
yeah.
I think challenging yourself and knowing, you know, what happens if something doesn't get done? You know what? Maybe nothing, and maybe that's okay. So really
Mm,
challenging your assumptions before you set those boundaries is one thing. And then touching upon what I said earlier about wants and needs, you know, is it something that you want to do versus you need to do? So, you know, going to the gym is a good example. You know, we all say, oh, I want to exercise more, I want to eat better. Well, do you have to do it because you want to, or you need to? And in some cases you need to, right? There's something urgent, there's a health
mm,
concern. That's different, right? But if you're saying to yourself, well, I want to go to the gym, but I won't get to it, and maybe that's okay. But also trying to think about how you want to balance your wants and your needs, because many of the things that we want are the things that are most meaningful to us. Like, yeah, maybe you need to do laundry. That's like a need because
Yeah.
it's going to be an urgent situation, right? But what are the things I really want to do? And really just trying to balance the wants and the needs, because having that clarity gives you, the clarity to focus on the things that are most meaningful. But you don't want to go kind of overboard and say, I'm only going to do the things I need to do, because you don't want to apply just this basic logic. At the end of the day, it's about what brings you sanity, and you want to balance between doing your laundry and actually doing something for you as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a lot of focus in there, Kim-Anh, on what really matters.
mhm.
What really matters, what's important, and making sure that, coming back to clarity, making sure that it's clear to you what's most important and what matters most, and then aligning yourself around that and making decisions based on
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
challenging assumptions as well, and where's that, is it an assumption, is it something that needs to be done or not, and making sure I guess actually what's coming up for me is making sure that you're being considered in your approach as well, and that you're not just blindly jumping in.
That's right.
Being thoughtful and considered about what you spend your time on, what you choose to do, and how that aligns with what's important to you and what your values are.
That's right. Yeah. And I think for me, in more practical terms, when I think about how I set my boundaries and what I set my boundaries around, in more practical terms, I do things like blocking out my calendar, and protecting time where I want to get something done. I make it a priority. That's just one tactical way of
Yeah.
doing it. Depending on your job, if you work a shift job where you have to be at work at a certain time or not, I have the luxury of having some flexibility around my calendar. So I don't have to do my day in a contiguous fashion. So I break it up. And so when my kids come home from school, I'm not in front of the computer, or if I have to be there for a drop off or a pickup, I protect that time so that I don't end up having the conflict of I need to be in two places at once. But at the same time, if I can't do something at work, then the boundaries that I set for myself that are maybe more recurring on a day-to-day basis, I don't necessarily always talk about those. I think it's important to set the boundaries and then also consider where you need to provide visibility into those boundaries. So for example, I think it's important to say, if you can't do something, you can't do it. But you don't have to necessarily go into the whole story about why. And I think sometimes women in particular tend to tell the whole story. They're like, well, I have to go pick up my kid from school because they got punched in the mouth and the tooth fell out. You don't have to necessarily open the kimono. So I think it's really important to also say, like, it's okay if you can't do it. Make the conversation around, can we do this tomorrow instead? Like, I can't make the time that you proposed. Can we do it tomorrow? And here's where I can be flexible. Like, make that about the conversation.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we all have responsibilities. And it's really about, well, when can we do it? Or can we do it at all? So really focusing on that, knowing what you're negotiable on, what you're flexible on, and what your non-negotiables are. So if there's something that's really, really important to you, and you most weeks you protect that, then you just say, that slot's not available.
Yeah.
Can we do it tomorrow? Can we do it in the morning instead?
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing in that, Kim-Anh, is that there's a recognition from you that there's no need to defend what you're doing. There's no need to justify it. It just is what it is.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings us neatly into, and you've kind of touched on it already, but it brings us into, so how do you say no? How do you say no eloquently? How do you say no without being marginalized? How do you say no and not fall out of favor with your boss without feeling guilty? And I will let you answer in a second and actually say what you think, but it sounds to me like for you it's a matter of fact kind of thing, where, well, it is what it is, and if I can't do something, I can't do something. You will turn it into, well, here's what I could do. So maybe providing a counter offer or something like that, but certainly not getting into the territory of, well, I need to provide a war and peace list of reasons why why I can't do that, to make sure it's okay, or to get permission. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
you're getting permission, you're just being clear and contracting around, well, here's how this needs to be. Let's design. And perhaps there's something that you do up front as well in any kind of new relationship at work, about contracting up front around, here's what works for me, what works for you, how do we make this work together, kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And so I do think that challenging yourself, to say, in fact, does this marginalize me? Does saying no actually mean I fall out of favor with my boss? Because maybe it doesn't, right? Because I think at the end of the day, at managers, they want you to prioritize. They don't want you to just blindly do things and not do things in a smart way. And they don't want you to say yes and then do a bad job, compromise on quality. So I think the first thing is, again, sort of giving yourself permission, right? Within reason. Obviously, it's about having a conversation. It's about having a trust-based relationship, either with your manager or with your direct reports. But I think just having the assumption that you can't say no because it's your boss, like I think you should assess whether you can say no and have that conversation about whether it's a yes or a no. And so the idea is like to not say no and then walk away from the conversation. As you said, right? It's not no, end of story. It's no, but if I can't do it by tomorrow, is the day after okay? It's really about still taking responsibility for the things that you need to do and negotiating on what makes sense. And if it's, I know you have to do this today, well, what should I take off my plate to make room for that, right? So it's knowing where you have to be flexible, where you can't be flexible, and then figuring out how to get it done, because the solution is not to just do more and just keep piling on top. It's about managing that workload so that you can maintain some sanity and do it right. So I also try and remind myself that guilt is a bit of like a self-imposed thing that we do. It's because it's our own expectations of ourselves, right? So like I feel like, and trust me, as a parent, I feel constantly guilty. There's all these things I want to do that I need to do. And I try and remind myself that guilt is in my head, right? It is me having that conversation with myself. And so I try and challenge those expectations, and I try and say that guilt is not a productive state to be in. What can I do? And try and just remind myself to celebrate a little bit more what I have done instead of focus on what I haven't done. So, I also try and get away from saying no. I try and say yes, but not now. So if my son says, can we play magic together? Can we play a card game? And I say, yes, but not right now. How about after dinner? Or yes, but not me. Can you go ask your dad? And, and you can do that at work too, right? If someone's coming to you and asking you to do something and really it's either not your job or you don't have time for it, then it's a yes, but not now, or a yes, but not me, and sometimes it's a flat out no, but it doesn't always have to be no.
Yeah, and even, it could be a yes and. Well, yes. And, your dad would be a great person to talk to about that.
Yes. Your dad is much better at this.
Your dad's much better. Yeah. Okay, like that. And the thing that I wrote down actually when you were talking there, which I really like, is guilt. Guilt is not a productive state.
It's not.
It really, and it so isn't, So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really like that. Kim-Anh, we are starting to run out of time, and I know that there has been a question in the chat pod, so I'm going to jump off script a little bit now, if that's okay, and just see what other questions there are before we start thinking about wrapping up. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, so Dave in the chat pod, Dave Purcell, thank you for submitting a question, Dave. So Dave, and I haven't actually read this, I'm going to be reading out loud, which is probably not wise, but here we go. So Dave is saying, my biggest fear of boundaries with senior leadership was potentially damaging my personal brand. But I find that showing leadership that I can function and still have these boundaries improved my brand. So rather than deteriorating from the brand, actually improved it. What tips can Kim-Anh have on boundaries with senior leaders? So I guess we talked about that a little bit. Anything you'd add, Kim-Anh?
No, I think, Dave, that's such a great call out to say that, again, we're challenging our assumptions that by setting boundaries, we're somehow marginalizing ourselves. Somehow that's a bad thing. I think that most of our managers would actually be happy to hear that we're setting boundaries For example, if someone's asking you to do something that's not your job, would your manager be happy to know that you set that boundary? You say, you know, like that's actually not my job here. Let me point you in another direction. I think it actually, setting boundaries shows a level of maturity around having a measured approach, doing things the right way. And we can all think back to sort of, you know, our younger days when we were a bit more shooting at the hip and just improvising a little bit more, right? And I think that as you progress in your career and you're thinking about, you know, it's about doing things smart. It's about doing things right. I actually think, to your point, Dave, it's really important to challenge the assumption that boundaries are bad. You know, we're not talking about saying, you know, every day I want to leave at 2. But, you know, if every day you want to leave at 2, then it's a conversation with your manager around, listen, if I need to leave at 2 every day, you talk about how you're going to get your stuff done anyway, right? It's showing maturity and showing responsibility and ownership over the things that, you know, matter to your manager, and talking about how to get it done.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And I see that Ian needs to drop shortly, so thank you for joining, Ian. Before I'm going to wrap up just with a couple of quick questions, but any other questions? So a comment there from Sally. Thanks for joining, Sally. Thank you, Kim-Anh, for your transparency and authenticity. Really encouraging to see such leadership from Sally. So thank you for that. Any other questions before I wrap?
Gail, maybe one more thing I want to kind of add is that,
okay.
You know, I think the one thing that I've learned in all my years of trying to juggle everything is, you know, not to be morbid, but it's kind of, you know, you touched on this earlier. It's like, what would you do if you didn't have a lot of time left? And so, you know, I like to remind people and say, listen, there's always going to be more work, but like, you know, on your deathbed, what are you going to look back on and regret, right? And they say that palliative caregivers, they talk about like the regrets that people talk about. It's like, I wish I'd had the courage to live my life with intent. I wish I'd had worked so hard. And I always say to my team too, listen, you're never going to wish that you worked more or you spent more time on that thing you were stressing about. So I really recommend that people think about, you know, don't wait for life to throw you a curveball, right? Do the things now that you change your life now, live your life with intent. Don't let life force you into this like unrealistic timeline where all of a sudden, you know, it becomes urgent or something more serious happens. So just get the stuff done today. Don't wait for that. Yeah,
you know, Kim-Anh, you gave me goosebumps when you said that. Like really, like I have goosebumps, and I, you know, from the heart. I mean, that really touches me and strikes a chord with me, and you know, it's so true. And unfortunately, you know, many people leave it too late to realize that. And you know, you have to live your life now.
Absolutely.
Not next week, not next year, not when you retire. You know, you have to live your life now. And I can't think of a better way to kind of finish up. Actually, I did have a couple of other questions. I know we are actually just out of time. I think maybe if you can give us a 30-second answer to this, and sorry to put you on the spot, but you know, there's a couple of things that I like to ask at the end of these sessions. One is, what do you know now that you'd wished you'd known 10 years ago? And the other one is, what's one piece of advice that you'd give to emerging leaders? And maybe you could wrap the two into one, but anything that you'd like to close out on just with that as a parting thought?
You know, if I could talk to myself 10 years ago, and 10 years ago I was going back to work, my kids were 1.5 years and almost 3. So that was probably, from a parenting perspective, the most crazy and challenging time. But if I think back to what I would tell myself 10 years ago, it was just to say, you know, you don't have as much time as you think. You know, life goes by in an instant. You know, with kids, time goes by far too fast. They grow up far too quickly. So, you know, live your life with intent, and don't think that you can't have it all. I think you can have it all. You just can't have it all at once. And so for me, I'm just thinking about just spreading it out, sequencing it, doing the things that are most important, and not feeling bitter about, I can't have something now. I think to myself, I'll have it later. And in terms of my biggest piece of advice with emerging leaders, I think that happy employees make for good employees. And so to Dave's point, you know, it's important as a manager, as an employee, to think about, you know, if you live your life with intent, if you ensure your team lives their life with intent, and you not only exemplify those things in the day-to-day, but that you allow your employees to do the same thing. I think that's a really powerful thing. I think it actually makes for for everyone to be a better employee at the end of the day. And as a leader, as a manager, I think it could actually even improve retention of your employees. So if you create a healthy environment and where people are happy, they'll do good work.
Yeah, they will. If people are happy, they will do good work. Perfect. Kim-Anh, I'm gonna wrap it there. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. It was so insightful, and I knew that you were a master at all of this stuff, and that's why I wanted you specifically to speak to it, because I do remember, when we used to work together, I remember actually being in Dublin with you. Gosh, such a long time ago now, but I remember having a conversation about this kind of thing with you, and about that whole thing around, I don't need to justify why I can't do something. I don't need to defend it. It just is what it is, and it's okay, and I give myself permission to do that. And I really admire that about you, and so thank you for taking the time to share your insights, for being here today, for giving up your time, and for being so vulnerable and so insightful. I really enjoyed listening to you and hearing from you, and thank you. And thank you everybody also for being here and joining us. And I hope that you got something out of it. I see there's some comments in the chat pod as well. So thanks everybody for being here, and we'll leave it there for today. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.